It was one of those rainy Saturday afternoons where the world seemed determined to slow down. The streets outside were slick with water, the air smelled faintly of damp leaves, and the steady sound of raindrops tapping against my window created a rhythm that made the house feel quieter than usual. My daughter was away at college, my ex-husband was long gone from the picture, and I had the entire house to myself. Or at least, I thought I did. I'd been in the living room, curled up on the couch with a blanket, scrolling through my phone. The TV murmured in the background, but I wasn't paying much attention. It had been weeks since I'd had any real conversation beyond polite exchanges at the grocery store or a brief hello to neighbors as I walked my dog. That quiet, at first, had been nice. But lately, it was starting to feel heavy. Then came the knock. It was soft at first, almost hesitant. I frowned, glancing at the clock. 2:30. I wasn't expecting anyone. Pulling the blanket off my lap, I padded barefoot to the front door, peering through the small window. Standing there in the drizzle, hands shoved in the pockets of his hoodie, was Caleb, my neighbor from across the street. He'd moved in with his aunt last year, right after turning 21. We'd spoken a handful of times in passing, usually when he was mowing her lawn or carrying groceries in for her. He was polite, quiet, and had one of those easy smiles that lingered even after he'd walked away. I opened the door, holding it halfway. "Caleb. Everything okay?" He gave me a small grin, raindrops clinging to his hair. "Hey, sorry to drop by unannounced. My aunt had to go out of town for the weekend, and the power just went out at her place. I didn't want to sit there in the dark. Thought maybe," he hesitated. "Maybe I could hang out here for a bit." I felt a smile tug at my lips. "Sure. Come in before you catch a cold." He stepped inside, brushing his shoes on the mat. A faint scent of rain and something warm, maybe cedar, followed him in. I shut the door and motioned toward the living room. "Make yourself comfortable," I said. "You want coffee? Tea?" "Coffee sounds great, thanks," he replied, looking around with quiet curiosity. I busied myself in the kitchen, filling the kettle and pulling mugs from the cabinet. I could feel his presence from the other room, not in a loud, overwhelming way, but like the subtle awareness you get when someone's watching you with quiet interest. When I returned with 2 steaming mugs, he'd shed his hoodie, revealing a simple gray t-shirt that fit him a little too well. He took the coffee with a grateful smile. "Thanks. It's freezing out there," he said, wrapping his hands around the mug. "Rain always makes the air feel colder than it is," I said, settling into the chair opposite the couch. "So, no power all weekend?" "Yeah, the outage map says maybe tomorrow afternoon, but," he shrugged. "I figured you wouldn't mind the company." There was something in the way he said it, not arrogant, but certain, as though he'd sensed I'd been craving conversation. I found myself relaxing more than I expected, laughing with him about little things, trading stories about the neighborhood, even reminiscing about the awkward first time I'd waved at him while still in my pajamas. Time moved differently after that. The rain outside softened to a steady patter, and the room grew warmer. At some point, I shifted to the couch beside him so we could both see the movie I'd put on. We weren't touching, but the space between us felt charged, like a quiet hum in the air. Halfway through the movie, the storm outside picked up again, thunder rolling low and steady. I glanced toward the window, watching the tree branches sway, and felt a sudden warmth against my shoulder. Caleb had leaned ever so slightly, just enough for our arms to brush. I didn't move away. Instead, I let the moment stretch, the sound of the storm filling the silence between us. When I finally turned to look at him, he was already watching me, eyes steady, searching. "You seem different today," he said quietly. "How so?" I asked, my voice lower than before. "Like you're letting yourself breathe," he replied. "I've seen you around, but you always seem guarded." "Not now." The words caught me off guard, partly because they were true. I'd built walls over the years, convincing myself they were there for protection. But here, on a rainy afternoon, with someone half my age who had no reason to see me as anything other than a neighbor, those walls felt thinner. "You're observant," I said finally. He smiled faintly. "Maybe I just pay attention to people who interest me." The air between us shifted after that, not in a reckless way, but in a way that made every glance feel heavier, every shared laugh a little warmer. We talked until the movie ended, then drifted into quieter conversation, the kind where you don't have to fill every silence. When he eventually stood to leave, the rain had stopped. The sun was just beginning to break through the clouds, casting a pale golden light across the living room. "Thanks for letting me crash your quiet afternoon," he said at the door. "Anytime," I replied, and meant it. He hesitated, then leaned in, not close enough to be bold, but just enough that I caught the scent of rain on his skin. "Maybe next time I won't need a power outage as an excuse." I smiled. "Maybe you won't." When I closed the door behind him, the house didn't feel so quiet anymore. It felt expectant. And somehow, I knew this wasn't the last time Caleb would come knocking.